I would like to thank you for inviting me to give some information about our program in Gouda. We are broadening our international focus a lot, and one of the courses we are offering now is an international class, and what I'm going to do in 10 minutes, about 10 minutes, is telling you some experiences from this international class. And it's all about the question, how can biblical core values become more significant to the teachers and values of Christian schools? And I am going to respond to this question from the perspective of teacher education because, in my opinion, the most important thing is to make a basis during teacher training. And I invite you to imagine me sitting in a small group, which is called in Holland a tutor group, with 4 participants, 4 students. 2 of them are Dutch students, 1 of them is coming from Romania, and the 4th one is coming from Nepal. And I start always such a tutor group with the question, what have you to bring in? What's your question? And then one of the Dutch students asked whether and to what extent persecution of Christians took place in other countries. The Romanian student answered that in her country there is no persecution at all. The student from Nepal, Pitambur, I think he agreed that I call his name. Pitambur told that officially Christians are free to adhere to their confession. But, he said, Christians in rural areas are isolated from the community. Christians in a small minority are a small minority and they are tolerated, but sometimes they are suffering from the fact that they will be not invited to have dinner with their neighbors or family, which is very important in Asian countries. And then the story was continuing. He suffers himself most from the fact that his wife is from a lower caste than his own family. He himself comes from the highest caste in Nepal, and his wife from the lowest caste. His own father and mother didn't want to see his wife, and although being married for 7 years, they never met. This really was a shocking story, especially for the Dutch student and the Romanian student. After that, we had a short discussion, but after that, Pitambur started to tell another story. It was the story of his school, of which he was the principal. His Christian school was founded by a few idealists in a very poor community. After a few years the school had started, the teachers discovered that there were a few basic problems. The first was the students were not encouraged to go to school by their parents, and the second was the health situation, which was very bad. Children were not washed and came into the classroom very dirty. And then they, with their team, they decided to action and called all the parents to a meeting. Some parents came, most of them did not come. And then they decided to visit all the parents, which is quite unusual in Nepal. And they gave them 2 messages. The first one, it is important that your child is coming to school. And secondly, please let them wash their hands before coming to school. So they did. In many cases they had to return to the homes and repeat their messages. The result of this was that a year later the motivation of the children for school was much better than before, and also the outcome, the school results, had improved. So far the story from Pitambur. Then I, in the role of a tutor, asked Pitambur why they acted so. And then he responded, Why? We felt mercy for the children. Quite simple. And the other thing is, we liked to take responsibility for the poor and for society. And he told they could maintain their effort because they worked as a team. They were a team of Christians and they shared the same convictions. Imagine, while hearing this story, the Dutch and the Romanian student listened carefully. For them, it was the first time hearing a story about taking responsibility for society as a teacher. And they were very impressed by it. The Dutch students are raised in a society with a good prosperity. And from experience, they know school as just being a school, or a teacher just being a woman or a man in the classroom, not a teacher visiting regularly poor families or making trouble about washing hands. And then the Romanian student started telling her own story about her kindergarten school in her community. She discovered at that moment the same problem in her village with gypsy children that are in her school. They came into her school unwashed and not being encouraged by their parents, like the children in Nepal. And now she started considering how the story of Pitamber could be adjusted to her situation. So far my report about this tutor group. What is happening here? What happened in this tutor group is about values in schools and values in society, and about preparing students to deal with values. This little report of the tutor group is exemplary for discussions we often have in these groups. Once curious questions are raised, stories come up, and while questions are answered, students are embarrassed. In most discussion, biblical values are at stake, like responsibility, respect, love, mercy, perseverance, and so on. In my observations, students in these groups are learning a lot about values because of the intense confrontation with unfamiliar stories. These confrontations seem to have more impact than giving lectures about worldview. But yet, worldview is developing. In my perception, the formation process of a Christian worldview is extremely important. Most of our students have compassion with children and young people and love to impart knowledge in the classroom. But working in a Christian school needs not only a good heart for students, but also a set of convictions that can be transformed by the renewing of the Spirit, like already the text of Romans is mentioned. We are called to trust and approve what God's will is. Like Graham Goyle has also already wonderfully explained this morning, values are inhabited. And I think there are two directions in which Christian teachers can be rooted in values. The first one is this: the convictions about what is God's will, to answer to God's love and to respond with behavior according to biblical rules and commands. The will and cognition is directed to serve the Lord. Values are not automatically growing in the minds of professional teachers. Discussion is needed. What happened in the tutor group is that every group member is integrating new elements into his worldview. Maybe some values in the core have already a place in the minds of the students. Once they have become concrete in a story, the importance of, for example, love or responsibility are emphasized. My hope and my expectation is that the Dutch members of the tutor group never forget the importance of being responsible not only for interacting with students in the classroom, but also being responsible for the broader context. Number 2, values are becoming more concrete through stories. Teachers tend to be very practical thinkers. They need examples more than theory to get an idea how one can put values into practice. Hearing stories means getting images how values work. Stories are giving meaning to value because they take place in certain specific teaching situations. And putting principles in context evokes understanding and elicits new meaning. These examples I have given are from the tutor group of our international class. This is a half-year program in which Dutch students are in a class for 3 months, and the other 3 months the Dutch students are going abroad for an experience there. They are doing research. And like I said, we are broadening our program to offer more courses like that. And the important question is whether the biblical core values could become more valuable for experienced teachers. For what I told now was about student teachers. But what about the experienced teachers in Christian schools? Would it be possible to create learning environments in which Christian teachers could enrich their existing worldview with that ingredient that could make their values more influencing society? I have three options. The first is, in my opinion, the challenge for teachers, whether they work in Christian schools or in public schools, is to search for the peace of the city, like the prophet Jeremiah says in Jeremiah 29. In Christian schools, teachers have the advantage to work in a team. They could look for projects like Pitambo did in his school in Nepal, fitting to their own context. The second is, individual teachers working at public schools need also to share their mission and build up their worldview in a way. Our experience now is that an international context is building worldview quite rapidly. When discussing concrete educational situations, the ingredients of the Christian faith are mixed with educational principles and traditions. Intercultural setting make it possible to find out the core of Christian education. Confrontation of cultural habits, like we often have the confrontation of teaching very confrontational and hierarchical, confronted with the reproductional manner of teaching. But when the confrontation takes place, it will certainly be clear that the style of teaching is not decisive, but imparting love is decisive. Showing interest for students, being willing to lower the level to make sure that students will learn instead of being unconcerned. And the third, and I'm going to stop, Henk, I would like to invite you to do the following. I would like to say to you, try to make at least one appointment with a colleague of a school from another country, not for a visit you yourself are doing. Most of the visitors here are school leaders or in position of staff. But I think the most important thing is that teachers themselves see situations which are strange for them, in which they can use like a mirror, and they can be confronted with another situation. So I think what we should do as school principals or staff members, we should send not ourselves to international situations, but we should send our teachers to other situations.